feminist women.
Mulheres feministas.
زنان فمینیست.
Vanyu Vachikonzero Chevakadzi.
نساء.
Mujeres feministas.
Yam femini. Femactivist.
Nari Mukti.
Matapang na babae. Kekchimai ka ishk.
Good afternoon, listeners. Welcome to Women's Magazine. I'm Margot Okazawa-Ray, your host this week. Just when it seemed things couldn't get any worse in the U.S., Gaza, Lebanon, Asia Pacific, they did. If you've been listening to KPFA, you have been getting lots of updates, so keep listening and keep getting the updates. So today, I am very honored to have my guest, Linda Quiquivix, the author of a brilliant book, Palestine 1492, A Report Back. It's in fact one of the best books I've read in a very, very long time, and actually just what I needed and wanted to understand better this time in world history. I have been seeking explanations beyond the specifics of any given horrific situation in the world, especially in Palestine, and the US, European, and other states' relationship to the genocide and the occupation. So I really lucked out when a friend handed me Palestine 1492, A Report Back. I'm now quoting from the back cover, the political memoir and geography lesson that places 500 years of struggles side by side with Palestine, from below and toward the common, she says. I devoured the book in a few sittings, and as you listen to Linda Quiquivix talk about her book and more, you'll get why. Welcome to Women's Magazine, Linda Quiquivix.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so honored to have you on my program today.
I'm really honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
And it was my great luck to have met you back in the fall. So it's great to have you on this program. So before we talk about Palestine 1492, A Report Back, can you please share with our listeners a bit of your life story? Who are you, and what do you want them to understand about you, and why you decided to write this book? And I'm following up on one of your dedications, and I quote, "I dedicate this book to those who asked me not to write it." Welcome.
Thank you for that question. Well, first, a little bit about me. I am the daughter of undocumented migrants from Guatemala who came to California in the 60s and 70s. And I was notable in my family because I was the one that had papers, that was a citizen. And so that was like a really big part of my identity growing up, like a lot of children from undocumented parents, is that when you were born in the United States and when you have papers, there seems to be like some magic that you can do and that you're looked upon to do. And so a lot of my life was trying to, be a good student in school and really live into this idea that I was an American. And so I was really into politics ever since I was really young. And just by default, like I went into the Democratic Party. It seemed like that was the place for me where, my people were being defended rather than degraded by the Republican Party. And so I underwent a transformation in that, though, that I'm realizing the more that I share it, the more common it is. And, as you're trying to assimilate into the new country, your family has now adopted, it was an experience that I realized was not making me a well person, the person that I wanted to be, because it was something that, as I got into the more elite spaces of the United States and in the world, like in Congress, I was a congressional intern when I was an undergrad. And that was kind of a heartbreak, just realizing that this country isn't really what I thought it was in the textbooks. And so, as I started then to learn more about the world, and I think my trajectory into studying geography at the university level, I started to be introduced to critiques of the world that I hadn't been in a conversation about at all in my life. Critiques from Marxism and from feminism and from anarchism, and a lot of critiques from these movements from below, globalization from below. I'm a product of, in the university setting, of the 90s and the early 2000s, as the world was globalizing after the fall of the Soviet Union. And so I was studying business administration as an undergrad because I wanted to be able to get a good job. And in that, I realized that the globalization we were studying was the globalization from above. And when I went into a geography program, in the master's program, I learned about globalization from below. And that's where I learned at the same time about the EZLN, who is the Zapatista Army for National Liberation, a Maya indigenous rebel organization in resistance still for 500 years in the south of Mexico, near Guatemala, in Chiapas. And at the same time, I was seeing free Palestine everywhere that I learned about the Zapatistas, I was seeing free Palestine. So I became so curious about both the Palestinian struggle and the Zapatista struggle that I ended up writing a dissertation on the Palestinian struggle through the lens of the map, how the map is used in a colonial way against indigenous peoples and how indigenous peoples counter map. And I was also learning from the Zapatista word, reading a lot of their communiques and being part of a group that would translate them into English. And so, as you know, I finished my dissertation and I went into academia for a couple of years. I decided that I wanted to, instead of stay with that kind of life, I wanted to come back to my communities and organize and put at the service of organized communities the skills that I was able to fine tune in academia, and continue, of course, learning in other ways from others who are intelligent, even if they may not have a college education or even a formal education, but have other educations and may not even be literate. There's just seeing that there's intelligence and knowledge and so much to contribute to another world from communities in struggle, first of all, and communities that theorize through their struggle. And so that's what a lot of my work has been trying to do, is amplify that. And on the dedication about, the book is also dedicated to those who asked me not to write it. There's a couple of those stories, and one that I'll share is that the perspective that I'm taking is something that is not very difficult. It's pretty simple, like seeing that that there's a structure of above, versus below, which is the thread of the whole book. And instead of us trying to assimilate to the above or reverse the positions of domination, where the below become the above and the above become the below, that we instead create another world, a world where all worlds fit, where difference is respected, where we don't have to have a standard of assimilation or domination within our relations. It's a very native way of seeing, and a very indigenous land-based way of seeing, that folks who have been trained in especially elite universities have a difficult time seeing that. And so I don't think that they fully understand the way that I come at with these questions, like with Palestine, for example, and with Black struggles, and with the Zapatistas, just with all other struggles, that I'm coming at it in a way where I am not an outside observer. I understand myself to be in struggle and to be accompanying these struggles side by side.
And that comes through so clearly in your book. And just to use a little bit of academic jargon right now, your book is really interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, right? And your life seems like that as well. The locations you described that you're connected to, it's not just one location. And you said you started off as a business major, right? Heading toward that capitalist route. But anyway, so thank you for that, wonderful introduction that, from my reading, really reflects how you wrote the book, what you wrote, etc. So we'll talk more about that. You mentioned one thing that I want listeners to know is that if you love pictures and drawings and maps, this is your book. It's really stunning, the black and white, the charcoal drawings, and using charcoal as a medium to illustrate parts of the book. Can we start with that before we go into some of the particulars of what you've written?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I have been doing charcoal art since I was young, pencil and charcoal since I was in elementary school, but didn't really practice it for a while until just very recently in these last few years. And so while I was writing the book, I was realizing, wow, this really needs a map. Like, I can tell this in words, but I would benefit from a map. So I think others might benefit from a map. So the nice thing about being an illustrator, and the type of illustration that I do is pretty representational. I don't know, for example, how to draw a nose, but I know how to shade for where it's light and where it's dark. And that's what charcoal allows, like that beautiful shading. So I just follow what's light and what's dark. And then a nose appears, so I draw what I see, not what I think I see, is the type of art that I know how to do. And so I realized that as I was making the art for the book, where I felt like, oh, we need a map here, or we need something here. As I was doing that, I was realizing that it went in line with the themes of the book itself without me planning it, because the book talks a lot about the binary, the Manichaean binary of good and evil. And, the way that words like lightness and darkness are used are given a superior and inferior mapping, right? So lightness is supposed to be the superior and darkness is the inferior, the good and the bad, as stuck in a binary. And so the book is a big critique of the binary of difference, where there's a superior and inferior hierarchical ordering of difference. And it is trying to amplify lessons from the Zapatista women in Chiapas, more specifically, on the way that they see difference. For example, in patriarchy, like their struggle in patriarchy is not to have a world without men. and to not have a world where they dominate men, but instead to be side by side together with the men as the women that we are, meaning like, you know, not having to change who they are in order to have rights because we are equal, because we are different, right? So I found that as I was drawing that the black and the white are often understood as binaries, and also they can be gradations, and they also are both equally important in any kind of illustration that I make, that anyone makes maybe, because both colors are necessary, the black and the white, in order for a charcoal drawing to be able to be read, right? So there isn't a superior or inferior value in terms of those colors. And the other,
Right, and let me just point to an example that caught my attention also, is you have a map here of the Ottoman Empire, and you talk about Europe, non-Europe, Africa, Eurasia, Yugoslavia, and it's as if I'm looking at some kind of a brain scan, you know, those MRI things.
yeah,
You know, where there's the shades and the dark and the grays and the whites. And I think this is what you're trying to, that you've done such a great job explaining the rationale for using charcoal drawings and charcoal.
yeah, it really can get you to focus on something according to how you use the light and the dark, right?
Right.
The
Yeah,
other,
brilliant. And for the readers, if you pick up this book, you'll see exactly what Linda is speaking about right now. What you described as really pushing the Manichaean binary, which we are so in, especially in dominant U.S. Western culture, academic culture, we're very caught up in.
that's right.
The other thing that really struck me about the book also is the way, all the ways you combine your experiences and philosophies of the Zapatistas. You also really pull the Mayan worldviews and philosophies and numerals and hieroglyphics and worldview, right? As well as talking about this moment in world history. So maybe we can start with the historical, the Zapatista experience you've had and what you learned there, and then also the Mayan.
Yeah, with with the Zapatista experience, I didn't realize how much I was reading when I was reading their communiques as an early engagement with the Zapatistas, because I first knew them for many years just through their communiques until I visited Zapatista territory. And it was during this time really engaging with their word and translating, which is, it forces you to do a really close reading, which is why I love translating texts that I love, because I get to sit with them for a long time and really think through meaning. With the Zapatistas, I didn't realize how much I was also reading about Maya philosophy, because they don't always point it out like that, although sometimes they do. Sometimes they have direct references to the Popol Vuh, which is like the Mayan Bible, an equivalent to maybe like the Quran, in that it was an oral a recitation, and then was put into print as the Spanish, the colonizers were burning the Maya books. So now only 4 books are known to exist. So as I was translating the Zapatista's word, I then started to get really interested in the Maya calendar, especially like with the end of the world prophecy of December 21st, 2012, where it was the end of a Maya long calendar cycle count and the beginning of a new one. And that's something that the Zapatistas on that day, they put out a communique about the end of the world. Do you hear it? Did you listen? It is the end. It is the sound of your world crumbling and the sound of our world resurging. So, the Maya calendar became so interesting to me in terms of like this question of ends and beginnings and cycles. And so I have been studying the Maya calendar with a teacher in Guatemala who is Ekchi, and he lives in the Petén rainforest. And while I was writing this book, I was also studying the Maya calendar. And the Maya calendar I'm studying right now, because there's several, is called the Tzolkin calendar, which is the 20-day energy signs. And as I was writing the book, I realized that there were 20 chapters, which I hadn't planned. I was just writing chapters as they came, and it was going to end when it ended, and it ended at 20. And I realized that there are 20 energy day signs. So I put the beginning of each chapter has a Maya hieroglyph, which is one of the day signs in order in the first through the 20th. And what was so interesting to realize is that a lot of the chapters were matching up to the actual energy of the day that the hieroglyph landed on. And so it's like there's like these sweet prayers, that if you know the Maya calendar, like you might not be surprised, for example, that the chapter 8, A World Cut in Two, has the Maya hieroglyph for the energy sign, the hash, which means to cut. And that one landed there. One that I did move, I moved one chapter from the middle end to the earlier beginning, and then it made a lot of the hieroglyphs match up. And that one was chapter 4, Panthers and Jaguars. And that one, the hieroglyph is Ish, which is the Jaguar hieroglyph, which means Mother Earth. And so like there's all kinds of like these little prayers throughout the book. And it also, like the front of the book, it has the Maya compass, which is the colors of the directions when we do our altars and our prayers. And the compass is a guide throughout the whole book, in that it has 7 directions, not 4. It has east, west, south, and north. And it also has the sky as a direction, the earth as a direction, and you as a direction, meaning that we're all within the earth. We're all between sky and the earth. We're not above the earth. We can't cut up the world the way that colonizers have done and have taught us to think about the land and the earth, that it's an object that can be cut up and be the property of whoever has a title. And so
which is what we're seeing, as we speak. And just on one page of your front matter, you talk about heart of the sky, heart of the earth, heart of the water, heart of the air, heart of the fire, our heart, my heart.
That's the beginning of our Mayan prayer. And so it's 7 directions that make it so that we can always remember we are part of the earth. And so it's kind of like a decolonial, anti-colonial compass throughout the book. And yeah, and the book also, I realized it was divided into 4 parts. And so the first part is Palestine from below, which is also the direction east. And then the next direction west is Palestine from above. That's section 2. And then section 3 is south, the 4th World War. And then the 4th part is north, which is a world where all the worlds fit. And what's really interesting about the directions is that the directions when we study them as spiritual guides and healers, each direction is given its own characteristics. And so, for example, east is the physical, west is the spiritual, south is the emotional, and north is the mental. So the physical, spiritual, emotional, and mental all make up the social. And those are also realizations as I was writing the book that, part one, Palestine from below, the physical does give a physical engagement with Palestine, like in a really, through maps. There's maps of Palestine. There's descriptions of my time living in Palestine as I was doing this work. And then the West, the spiritual Palestine from above, that section talks about the obsession of Jerusalem that the West has had. And it talks about how in 1492, the main reason why Columbus was sent west was to take Jerusalem after Granada had been taken as well. And that was because the Muslims or Ottoman Empire was over in the east. And so that is the spiritual, this a very spiritual war, sadly, that was imposed on the globe on 1492 for that reason.
Right, and in reference to Columbus, you talk about Columbus and them, not just Columbus as an individual, which is one of the concepts I really love in the book. Before we go there, though, can you start with the Palestine from below? Because reading it was as if I were reading your journal. I could have been reading my own life story in some similar context.
Yeah.
What made you start an academic book, with the journal entries, it looks like?
Yeah. Actually, I was when I was living in Palestine in 2010 to 2011, doing my doctoral research on this question of maps, I kept a journal entry every single day. I forced myself to write because I realized just how precious everything was and that I knew I would forget the details. And so I didn't expect to publish them, though. I was actually just looking through them as I was writing the book. I was looking for the name of someone who I interviewed because they were also my field notes. And so as I was reading it, and this happened after the Tufan, after October 7, I realized that there were really important insights for just everyday, ordinary life of Palestine, like people living like in the midst of a genocide, like how it's a look to that Palestine from below rather than starting from the Palestine from above, who is like the leadership in power with Oslo and the PA and beyond, so so they actually were my journal entries. I just modified them or small edits here and there and asked everyone how they'd like to appear with their name or with the pseudonym, and got a lot of really great feedback about that, although it wasn't something that I had planned to ever publish. And for me, it ended up helping me write the rest of the book because I had just found my voice, which was my regular voice. I was going to at first publish the book in the third person, and lost the fight.
Like a good academic.
Yeah, like a good academic, exactly. I lost a fight to a Palestinian friend who was so shocked and said, "You have to do it in the first person." But it's something that it's different. Like, you don't want to center yourself. Like, I didn't want to do that kind of writing. I wanted to put myself within a world, right, that I was starting to get to know. And so once I did that, I found who I was talking to, and it's anyone who I love and who loves Palestine and loves people and loves humanity and wants a better world.
Yes, and that first chapter does that, and it brought me in as a reader right into it. And then you went on to some very important theoretical perspectives too. And I noticed that your book is very well referenced, right? Speaking one academic to another, sort of academic to a real academic, me, sort of. But anyway, so we'll come back to that. And thank you for this conversation. And when we come back, I'd like to have you explain some of what I thought were your key concepts, some of your theoretical perspectives. But before we do that, let's take a station ID. Please, everyone, you're listening to Women's Magazine on KPFA 94.1 FM on your dial or www.kpfa.org. I'm in conversation today with a fabulous person and a wonderful researcher whose book I'm just completely fallen in love with, and that is Linda Quiquivix, the author of Palestine 1492, A Report Back. And you're on Women's Magazine. I'm Margot Okasawa Ray.
جرحك عم بتخبي انت يا وطني بتضل عنوان المحبة عالي اسمك يا لبنان تبقى لو خلص الزمان عالي اسمك يا لبنان تبقى لو خلص الزمان يا لبنان يا وطني الغالي شمسك نور الليالي مجدك طالع بالعالي يا لبنان رح ابقى حدك يا لبنان انت يا وطن الاحلام يا لبنان رح ابقى حدك يا لبنان مجدك يا مجد الايام يا لبنان بجنون بحبك يا لبنان.
I thought I'd bring in Julia Boutros, the Lebanese singer, singing about Lebanon, given what's happening in Lebanon as we speak. So back to the book, Linda, please, couple of what I think about as key concepts I'd like you to explain. And let's start with this idea of the aboves and belows that you mentioned before, and this idea of downward assimilation.
The above and the below is a structural position. So it's trying to show that there exists a relationship of all of us where we're pitted against each other, where somebody is above and somebody is below, somebody is superior and somebody is inferior. And that happens a lot in our everyday lives, these rankings, and we learn them quite well, sadly, as children in schools, that, you know, where you get your grades A, B, C, D, F, and there's a standard to meet in order to be at the top, at the A's, at the above. And if you don't make it there, then there's something about you that's deficient, is what they tell us, what we're told or what we're taught. Maybe not specifically those words, but it's something that is generally assumed and we don't question it. So the above and below is a critique. A critique being, the way that I use that word critique is to talk about showing what the assumptions are that go unspoken. So with the above and the below, the assumptions that go unspoken is that difference is encouraged, is rewarded by being ranked a superior value or an inferior value. And what I find is so helpful about that, and a lot of authors and writers have used above and below. Where I get a lot of this education from is from the Zapatistas themselves, who use this language of above and below. The above, they say, make their lives at the cost of the below. So anyone making their lives at the expense of others, it's way out of balance. And so they have a communique that I reprint in the book in part 4, where they make clear that in the fight against the above, we aren't referring here to banishing those above. We're talking about destroying the social relations that make it possible for someone to be above at the cost of someone else being below. And so this is also language that I think harkens to the haves and the have-nots, but with a very specific, a specificity about that those who have at the expense of those who don't have, right? So that's, it's more like a refined idea, more than just difference, just that some people are rich and some people are poor, that there is a relationship between the two, that those who are rich because there's poverty, you know?
Right. And I think that's what I really appreciate about how you're conceptualizing the above and the below. You can see throughout the book the relationship, right? And so the aboves aren't necessarily also from one demographic group, right?
That's right.
And neither are the belows, right?
Right.
And so can you talk a little bit about that, because it kind of pushes, on this this conceptualization of identities and identity politics.
Yes, it's something that I learned from the Zapatistas in one of their early communiques that I came across, like about 10 years after they published it, that is very famous because it's often quoted as Marcos is gay. And it's a communique written by the former spokesperson of the Zapatistas in 1994, Subcomandante Insurgente Marcos, who was being delegitimized by the Mexican state, or the supporters of the Mexican state, or trying to be delegitimized by being called gay. And so he wrote back and said, yes, Marcos is gay. Marcos is gay in San Francisco, Black in South Africa, Asian in Europe, Jewish in Germany, a Palestinian in Israel. And I realized, wow, that's not just identity that Marcos is talking about, that the Zapatistas are talking about. They're talking about an identity that is placed below, that is being crushed below. And not only that, is also resisting. So, gay in San Francisco, right? There's a huge history of gay resistance, queer resistance in San Francisco. And Palestinian in Israel is the below, just like a Jew in Germany is the below. And so that really helped me in trying to figure out how do we go beyond identity? Because I was noticing around me that, especially I was getting into the more elite spaces, that there were people from oppressed communities like myself, but we were being encouraged to assimilate into America, into Americana, that kind of like way of life, individualistic and not being part of a community, for example, and so many other things, like, capitalist subjectivity, all of that. And I realized that identity really it can't explain everything, because we're in a situation, and this is a big lesson that we can learn from Zionism on what not to do, right? Is that since so-called decolonization after World War II, some of the below have been able to go above because they can make themselves be useful to empire. And that, to me, Israel to a T has done that, sadly, to the Jewish struggle. It has co-opted it through Zionism, even though, like, what's really nice to see, especially after the Tufan, is that there's a split among Jews all over the world about Israel. It's not such a consensus anymore. And I realized that that's the below assimilating up, asking those oppressors above for a seat at the table, which is also a term that I refer to, that I bring up in the book, because it's something that I heard a lot in Washington, and you hear a lot in political circles and on these questions.
Right.
Do we engage electoral politics? Like, you have to have a seat at the table or you'll be on the menu, right?
Right.
And if we're going to critique that, then we're going to ask, why does it have to be either or? Why is there even a menu to begin with? Like, we all need to eat, but why do some have to be on the menu? You know, and so it's a critique of just those very basic ways of relating to each other that we're taught in everyday life, that we're not encouraged to ask, are we okay with that? Is that how we want to live? Can we live a different way? So the above and the below, I feel, is really helpful, because we don't get stuck on identity. Identity is important. It still is relevant. It still helps tell the story, but it's structural position that we need to be looking at, and how power circulates within that structural position of above and below, how we feed into it as well, and how we can disengage our energies from it so that we can create a world where we all respect difference, each other's difference, a world where many and all worlds fit.
And that's how I found that above and below frame so helpful, because it helped me step back and look at this, the what you referred to in our conversation about the circuits of power, right? That you just kind of alluded to. You didn't use that word, but how power circulates, and you know, who's in, who's out, you know, etc. So that was very, very helpful for me. The other thing that was very helpful in the book was the Columbus and them, because it really gave a historical perspective on what's happening, and that Columbus wasn't just one dude, you know, going out. Can you talk about Columbus and them?
Yes, Columbus and them, I thought that was, it was a way that I resolved this issue of how not to just isolate Columbus, because that's something that we're taught to do, is to focus on individuals rather than on the worlds that were rewarding criminal behavior, for example, right? So like, this happens also like when we learn about the Jewish Holocaust, like Hitler gets like not even just criminalized, but he gets banished into like this monster that is not human, except he was very human, and any one of us might be that monster unless we decide not to be, you know, and that's with that binary again, right? That you're either good or evil, right? And that there isn't any kind of temptation toward evil, like, or you know, or whatever we want to call it, like unethical positions. So Columbus and them, that phrase, it helped resolve this for me, because it points to Columbus and you know, with 1492, which is an event that the only event that I had learned previously was October 12th, when Columbus and his crew and them invaded this hemisphere. But it's not just about the invasion of Abya of these native lands called the Americas today. It was also a war against Islam. And so, and you know, we get that story as well of January 2nd in Granada and the expulsion of the Jews. It was a war against Judaism as well. It was a war against anything different. So Columbus and them are those who want to impose one world on us all, which is the project that has been ongoing since 1492. And Columbus has been the iconic figure for both of those events, because he was there on January 2nd in Granada, waiting to talk to Isabella as she, you know, right after she finished taking the Alhambra Palace in Granada, and you know, having the last battle against Islam on the Iberian Peninsula. So yeah, so Columbus and them, it helps it so that I don't, you know, so we talk about like a subjectivity Columbus and them, the them could be anyone who agrees with Columbus,
Mhm. Right.
you
As
know,
we've seen in world history, right? And as we're seeing right now.
mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah, and it's also something that I feel like can help us maybe, I hope, in, having these questions, especially in these lands about decolonizing and in Palestine about decolonizing and everywhere, is, this question of who's a settler and who's a native. It can get caught up in identities and, bloodlines, which is still stuck at identity and doesn't tell us about what world do we want now, no
Hmm.
matter what our identities or bloodlines have been or are. Who do we want to become? Do we want to be Columbus and them, or do we want to become somebody else, many somebody else's?
Great. Yeah, great question. Thank you for explaining both the above and below, and then Columbus and them, because they're big frames for the book. So I want to also, because this is a feminist program, can you talk a little bit about the Zapatistas and women's issues?
Yeah, they figure quite a bit in the fourth part of the book. The Zapatistas, about themselves, about them, they're in the third chapter of the book. But about the Zapatista women, about the Zapatista women, it's actually the work of Silvia Marcos, who is a Palestinian Mexican intellectual who is a direct interlocutor with the Zapatista movement and gets invited all of the time to their encounters, to share analyses. And she works very closely with the Zapatista women. And I've had the honor of translating some of her work and learning from her about the philosophies of gender in, Mesoamerica, not just among the Maya, but throughout Mesoamerica. And when she was telling me about the above and the below, I was translating an essay for her where she had just gone to the Zapatista little school in 2013, where it was like a week-long study. It was called First Grade, where we all got textbooks and studied, the Zapatista movement through textbooks that they gave us and experiences living with them and eating with them and working with them. And so I was helping translate her report back, and I was so struck by how she talked about dualism, that a dualism does not have to be binary. A dualism can be fluid. And that is how gender is understood, or the feminine and the masculine are understood in Mesoamerican philosophy, is a fluidity between different, so complementary opposites, which is something that is present all over the world, in Asia, Africa, Europe, here, the Americas, complementary opposites. But in the dominant world, the world of 1492, everything is supposed to be about competition.
Right.
Opposites are competitive. And so it was just
Right.
such a simple, I call it a conceptual curanderismo, a conceptual healing that she did for me, which is making me realize that, that dualism can be fluid, complementary. And it was from the Zapatista women that she was able to pull out in their own words, all the ways that they were philosophizing at this level. And something that really stuck with me is when they would say, we are equal because we're different. We are equal to the men, right? Because we're different than the men. And that's because there isn't a standard for equality. When I think about a standard for equality, I think about citizenship, where there is a standard to be met. You have to check off certain boxes in order to have rights. That's the world we live in, and Palestinians don't have rights. They don't have a state. It's through the state, through citizenship, that we are told that we are rights-bearing subjects. And so the stateless don't have those rights. And so
Right. And the idea of, we are equal because we're different, it completely pushes against, this dominant views about difference
that's right.
that you've been talking about. Yes.
Yes, because there's no standard anymore. Like the moment we have a standard introduced, we have introduced inequality.
Right.
A standard for equality introduces a standard for, introduces inequality. And so if we can begin with difference is not a defect, but it's our power. It is, for example, with Mother Earth, biodiversity is the power of life. That is, I think, a framework for us to have a different kind of world, a different kind of relating to each other, way of relating to each other, where we understand that we are all different and we all have our gifts to develop in this world. And rather than being schooled into a standard, we could realize that all of us are equally intelligent and different in our intelligences, So that's something that I thought was such a huge lesson from the Zapatista women, that we are equal because we are different. So difference is our power. And then of course, like what I learned then also is that, they learn this because they learn it from the world, from Mother Earth, from the plants, from observing other life. How does other life relate? How do we relate to life? How do we relate to food? Agriculture with the milpa, or the Three Sisters garden, as it's known in North America, with the beans, the corn, and the squash, that are very different plants, but each one in their superpower together creates a really beautiful garden and subsistence. The corn,
Yeah, what a wonderful metaphor, right?
right?
And literal as well, right?
And literal, yeah, where the corn is the leader, the beans are the giver, because it gives nitrogen from the air into the soil, and the squash is a protector. With the leaves, it crawls on the soil and protects the soil. And how can we coordinate ourselves like that? How can we learn from plants, and how difference can be cooperative and complementary?
Yeah, imagine that. The time is just running. But we do have a few minutes left. I'd like to just ask you a question, something I was questioning in my own reading of the book. You end the book, the final chapter that's focused on Blackness, Black liberation struggle, and Afro-pessimism. Why end with those? What do those have to do with the rest of what you wrote?
Yeah, I decided to end the book with that chapter because I knew I wanted to talk about anti-Blackness throughout the book more specifically. And so I thought it would be a good way to end the book, because it ends with an invitation for a difficult conversation, which I think is liberating. I don't think it has to be difficult, but it is a conversation that has been difficult to have, as I've been observing the discourse in the last 10 years, especially. And that's the conversation about the specificities of Blackness. And it's related to how, struggles in the United States have understood themselves over the last couple of generations, especially like a people of color. And it's something that when we organize against white supremacy as people of color, and we don't also recognize that the opposite pole of the above of white supremacy is the below, which is anti-Blackness. So as we're told to assimilate into the United States society, we learn either directly or indirectly, but we learn, and sometimes both, that it's better not to be Black in this country. And it's something that we learn also as people of color. So there's a lot of anti-Blackness in a lot of our communities, and even in Black communities. There's a lot of anti-Blackness that is accompanied by white supremacy, where even if you can't assimilate to be white, at least don't be Black. That's what we're taught. And so it's a difficult conversation to have when we focus on identity without also focusing on structural position. So I thought it would be good to have that conversation and put it at the end of the book, after, we've already gone through the above and the below and the side by side, because it helps us, I think, understand better that the above and the below structural positions of power is really at the root of it, it's a master-slave dialectic. The master is above and the slave is below. And that's like just par excellence, the argument for those who make their lives at the expense of other lives, right? Is that the way that the master and the slave relate. And so in order for us to realize that that is the root of what we're fighting, then we need to pay attention to who is marked as the slave in our society. And that is how I understand it and how I argue, how I understand the world, and that is Blackness. So whiteness, the way that I define whiteness is that there's a structural position that says white is superior, and then there's also people who are born who are marked as white with light skin, light eyes, light hair, for example. So their adjective of just how they look is mapped on to a structural position of superior, right? And so then, and that's the master position. And the so-called slave position is those who are phenotypically Black, like African, are marked in the inferior structural position, right, of the slave, of the below. And that's Blackness, as I define those terms. And I'm a big believer of defining how we're using terms, because I feel like if we don't do that,
it's very important. Yes.
Yeah. So I end that chapter because there's been a lot of conversation in the last maybe 10 or 15 years within the Palestinian solidarity movement and within all of our movements really about anti-Blackness. And I don't think that the conversation, the way that it's been had, has really been speaking in the same concepts or in the same language. I don't know, maybe they are, but I kind of feel like it's not a difficult conversation for us to have if we can understand why the world as it is, this world of 1492 needs to be dismantled and another one needs to be created. And that's the argument that I find really attractive in the Afro-pessimist position. And although I know it's a very academic discourse and it's not something that I'm super involved with, the early writings I found.
Okay, we're almost out of time. So I have one last question.
Sure.
This book is self-published and listeners can read the book for free on the publisher's website, wildoxbooks.org, wildoxbooks.org. Why self-publish? You have about 10 seconds.
Oh yeah, self-published because I didn't want anyone to tell me what I couldn't write and what I could write. And I knew how to do it.
Freedom.
Yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much, Linda.
Thank you, Margot.
Just a
American historian, author, and leading scholar of racism and anti-racism, Ibram X. Kendi.
The major theory that's being used to get people to consent to their own domination is Great Replacement theory. This is a political theory that suggests that there are these globalist elites who are enabling peoples of color to displace the lives and livelihoods and even electoral power of white people who apparently therefore need authoritarian protection. And so when we hear phrases like immigrants are invading the nation, we're hearing Great Replacement theory, or diversity programs are discriminatory, or there's an internal enemy. We're hearing a theory that's trying to get people to believe they need protection, they need someone to save them. And then the authoritarian comes around and says, I will protect you and I will save you by snatching your freedoms and rights.
Storytelling for social change, only on KPFA.
So someone in 1949 was like, yeah, here's the idea. We'll build a radio station, broadcast actual truth, invite activists, artists, and thinkers to speak freely, and the public will just chip in to keep it going. Oh, and no commercials. Ever. Seriously, that was the plan. Fast forward more than 75 years later. Yup, we're still here. Still powered by listeners. Still not for sale. KPFA. A fresh signal in a dial full of static.
If following the corporate media narratives is cool, then we've been outcasts since 1949. This is 94.1 KPFA and 89.3 KPFB in Berkeley, 88.1 KFCF in Fresno, and online everywhere at kpfa.org.